Today, Spain is headed to the polls to elect a new government. Now, if the polls end up being correct and the centre-right People's Party comes out on top and goes on to form a coalition with the populist right Vox Party, then it'll obviously have massive implications for Spain's domestic politics, but also for Gibraltar, the tiny British overseas territory at the southern tip of the Iberian Peninsula, which was left out of the UK-EU Brexit deal. For the past year or so, the incumbent Spanish government, led by the centre-left PSOE party, have been negotiating a new Gibraltar-specific mini-agreement with the UK in order to reduce border frictions and keep Gibraltar's economy ticking over. But previous comments from Vox officials suggest that if they get into power, then they're going to scrap this deal, creating a hard border between Gibraltar and the rest of Spain. And they may even use this to pressure the UK into giving up the territory altogether. So in this video, we're going to take a look at Spain's upcoming election, Gibraltar's unique status in Brexit negotiations, and what might happen if Vox are elected. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. Before we get into Gibraltar specifically, a little bit of context on Spain's upcoming election. Originally, the Spanish election was scheduled for late 2023. But on May 28th, Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez took a heavy beating in the local elections, with his party, the centre-left PSOE, losing all but 3 of the regions it had previously controlled. Despite Spain having the lowest inflation rate in the EU, historically high employment levels, and record economic satisfaction, Sánchez and his party are still relatively unpopular, with a net approval rating of -15. Now, we don't have time to go into all the detail here, but this is due to various reasons. Occupying power during COVID, deals with Basque and Catalan independence parties, and their only yes means yes controversial consent law, under which more than 100 sex offenders were inadvertently released from jail. Anyway, with all of these factors combined, at the local elections, the PSOE lost its plurality to the centre-right People's Party, or PP, who also benefited from the disappearance of the centrist Ciudadanos party, but beyond that, the right wing generally outperformed the left during the election. Vox, for example, a relatively new party that sits to the right of the PP, came in third with 7% of the vote, while the left, which has been beset by infighting over the past year or so, basically underperformed, in large part because Spain's electoral system punishes split tickets. On the day following these elections, May 29th, Sánchez called a snap election which surprised everyone, especially those in Brussels, because Spain was about to take hold of the EU presidency. However, some in Spain were less shocked, as Sánchez is a bit of a renowned risk-taker. For example, he first became Prime Minister in June 2018 after winning the first no-confidence vote in Spanish history, which removed the then PP Prime Minister. Nonetheless, this latest deal is certainly Sánchez's biggest gamble thus far. Why exactly did Sánchez call an early election? Well, there's several reasons, but let's run through them quickly. Firstly, by calling a snap election, Sánchez took control of the narrative, cutting short the opposition's honeymoon period and forcing the main opposition party, the PP, to stay in campaign mode. Secondly, by calling a snap election, Sánchez put immediate pressure on his leftist allies to stop squabbling and finally unite under a single electoral alliance. And this gamble almost immediately paid off, because on June 9th, the leftist groups banded together to form the Sumar Alliance. Thirdly, this snap election put the leader of the PPP on the spot with regards to him doing a deal with the far-right Vox party nationally. Now, the PPP have already been doing countless deals with Vox, both locally and regionally, but this rush helped Sánchez paint the PPP as a gateway to the far right. And lastly, this will be the first Spanish general election to be held in July since 1839, and that's surprisingly crucial, because a July election means that schools have broken up and many Spanish people are on holiday, which could affect turnout in unpredictable ways. But wait a second. This is a TLDR UK video about Gibraltar. So what's going to happen next in this whole situation, and how exactly does this actually affect the UK or Gibraltar? Well, it obviously all depends on who wins the election, but the latest polling doesn't look good for Sanchez, with current polling showing PSOE on course to lose the election and be replaced by the PP. Importantly though, the PP are looking very unlikely to achieve a majority here, which means they'll need the support of a party like Vox to govern. And this is why Spain's election could affect Gibraltar. Relations between Spain and the UK over Gibraltar have always been tense. After all, Spain considers it to be the last colony in Europe. But ever since Brexit, things have become increasingly fraught. The people of Gibraltar themselves voted 96% to remain and have been left in limbo with no idea where their future lies. For context, the Rock wasn't included in the UK-EU post-Brexit trade deal and was left outside of the customs union. In 2020, a temporary agreement was introduced which allowed for freedom of movement at the Spain-Gibraltar border in order to avoid disruption while Gibraltar remained a British territory. But that's still only a sticking plaster. So for the past year or so, negotiations have been ongoing with the goal of creating a common travel area between Gibraltar and the Schengen zone. Now, if achieved, this would remove most immigration controls at the border, and that's really crucial to Gibraltar's economy, because Gibraltar is dependent on about 15,000 workers who cross the border every day from Spain. And that's even more crucial than it sounds, because they provide for about half of the country's health service, as well as working in economically crucial industries like online gaming and insurance, as well as tourism. To put it bluntly, without these workers, Gibraltar's economy would grind to a halt. So it's clear why they're so keen to reach a more permanent, fixed deal. In fact, reports from early this year showed optimistic signs, saying that a deal was close to being achieved. But if Vox were to enter government, this whole thing could be scuppered, because Vox have clearly signalled that they'll take a much harder line on Gibraltar than Sanchez ever did. For context, Vox have always been vexed by Gibraltar, and have suggested multiple times that Spain should just take the territory back from the UK. In 2016, at the time of the Brexit vote, Vox's former leader was arrested after he unfurled a giant Spanish flag across the Rock of Gibraltar. And in July 2021, Vox's general secretary said that her party would try to suffocate Gibraltar into rejoining Spain, and described it as a pirate cave. And this issue has only become more pertinent as Sanchez has neared a deal. In the local election campaign, Vox's leader claimed that any deal with the UK that didn't recover Gibraltar to Spain would be a betrayal. So understandably then, Spanish officials have said that if the PPP forms a coalition with Vox, then the UK-EU deal would be, quote, as good as dead, creating a hard border between Gibraltar and Spain, which will be an economic and political catastrophe, and could possibly precede an attempt to squeeze the UK into returning the territory. If you're interested in these kinds of things, you should check out Neo's series Underexposure. This beautifully produced series from one of our favourite creators runs through a number of shadowy and unexplained situations, from how the Twin Towers were built to the raid on Bin Laden, or the worst aviation accident in history. As I'm sure you can see, this series is stunningly produced, and the research behind it is honestly even more impressive. If that sounds good to you, then you can watch this series alongside a load of others which perfectly complement TLDR videos exclusively on our streaming service, Nebula, where you can also find a bunch of TLDR content too. That's because we post all of our videos ad-free on Nebula, as well as sharing some of our videos there before they ever make it to YouTube. Not only that, we also release hours worth of content only on Nebula every month, from extended editions of our show The Daily Briefing to exclusive explainers and behind-the-scenes clips. And the good news is that all of this, TLDR content, exclusive documentary series, and a bunch of other brilliant creators, are available at a great price. That's because if you sign up using our link in the description, then you can get Nebula for less than £2 a month. So help out the channel and learn more by signing up to Nebula. Thanks for your support.